What would you do if you discovered that your place in your own family, the very title, the very legacy you were born into, was being quietly erased, replaced by someone you've never even met? Imagine being blindsided, not by an enemy, but by your own father, your own blood. That is exactly what happened in the corridors of Buckingham Palace, behind the gilded doors and velvet curtains, as King Charles allegedly made a decision that would shock the world, elevating a previously unknown figure, Johnny Thompson, to the title of Duke of Sussex, while completely cutting Prince Harry out of the royal family. The audacity, the secrecy, and the betrayal are almost too much to fathom. And yet, according to insiders, this is not only true, it's a story that has been building in the shadows for months, if not years. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. From the outside, the royal family is often seen as a perfect, unshakable institution. Public appearances are polished, smiles are practiced, handshakes are choreographed. But behind that polished veneer lies a world of whispers, ambition, and silent wars. The idea that a prince could be erased from history is not just unthinkable, it's revolutionary. And it's happening right now. You might be asking, who is Johnny Thompson, and why does he suddenly hold the key to a title that has long been associated with Harry, a man who grew up in the public eye, facing every scrutiny imaginable? Why would King Charles, the father who raised Harry, make a decision that could potentially devastate his own son emotionally and politically? And most importantly, how did the palace orchestrate this so quietly that Harry, a man trained for media and public battle, was left completely blindsided? To understand this seismic shift, we need to travel back a little. The rift between Prince Harry and his father, King Charles, has been the subject of endless speculation. Some claim it began with Harry's choice of Meghan Markle. Others say it was fueled by a lifetime of feeling like the spare, the second in line who never quite measured up. But the truth, insiders suggest, is far more complex and far more calculated than mere personality conflicts or public disagreements. This is a story about strategy, about legacy, and about power, the kind of power that moves silently, reshaping history without the world even noticing until the reveal is made. And now, Johnny Thompson. Who is he really? According to palace whispers, Thompson is not some casual acquaintance or minor noble. No, he is a man who, until recently, operated almost entirely out of the public eye. A man whose presence in elite circles was known only to a few insiders. Yet somehow, he earned the trust and now the unprecedented elevation of the reigning monarch. It's not just the title of Duke of Sussex he's receiving. It's access, influence, and a platform that once belonged to Harry. One day, Harry was the Duke of Sussex. The next, that title was quietly handed over to someone else, with the world, and the prince himself, left to react. This isn't just about a title. It's about erasure. For Prince Harry, who has spent his life under the intense glare of the public eye, being written out of family history is not just a slight. It's a seismic emotional earthquake. How do you cope when your legacy is stolen, when your identity is rewritten, and when the very people you trusted the most decide you are no longer part of the narrative? For Harry, the palace corridors must have felt suddenly colder, the walls suddenly taller, the whispers suddenly louder. Every step he takes is now shadowed by a crown that seems to have moved forward without him. And yet, the timing of this is critical. Why now? Why would King Charles, at a moment when the monarchy is under unprecedented scrutiny, make a move so audacious, so fraught with risk? Some suggest it's about loyalty. Others say it's about cleaning house, resetting the royal image in the face of scandals, media criticism, and public discontent. But if that's the case, why choose Johnny Thompson? Why bypass Harry, a man who has already survived wars with the press, public humiliation, and personal heartbreak? There is a strategy here, a method to the madness, and it is as shocking as it is secretive. This story matters because it's bigger than one family feud. It's about how institutions hold and wield power. It's about how bloodlines, tradition, and privilege intersect with modern expectations of fairness and accountability. The world is watching the monarchy, and the stakes have never been higher. If the heir of Sussex can be erased, what does that mean for future generations? What does it mean for the concept of legacy itself? And what does it say about the unseen forces that guide the choices of kings? But the twists don't stop there. Reports indicate that this decision wasn't merely ceremonial. It involved private meetings, secret consultations with advisors, and even whispered threats. Staff members allegedly warned Harry that the change was coming. Friends tried to intervene. Public relations teams scrambled to control the narrative. But despite all this, Harry was left out, excluded from the very conversations that determined his own fate. Imagine the betrayal. Imagine being in a palace, surrounded by people who know the truth, yet feeling completely powerless. Every glance, every handshake, every nod is a reminder that you are no longer in the inner circle, that the crown has moved forward without you. And here's where the real intrigue begins. Johnny Thompson didn't just step into a title. He stepped into a network, a web of influence, and a story that has been carefully curated by King Charles himself. Each move is calculated, each decision premeditated. This is not luck. This is strategy. And for Harry, the realization that he has been sidelined is only the beginning. Every action he takes now will be shadowed by this decision, by the weight of public expectation, and by the personal heartbreak of being replaced. So what happens next? How does a prince react when his identity is stripped away? How does he navigate a world that suddenly treats him as if he no longer belongs? And perhaps most importantly, what secrets does Johnny Thompson hold that might shift the balance of power yet again? Because insiders whisper that Johnny is not just a pawn. He has influence, connections, and knowledge that could either protect him or explode the palace's carefully constructed narrative. By the end of this story, you will know exactly how Prince Harry went from a global figure of royalty and philanthropy to someone completely cut out, erased, replaced, and perhaps humiliated by the very institution that once defined him. You will witness the rise of Johnny Thompson, the shocking choices of King Charles, and the invisible forces that manipulated a centuries-old system in ways the public has never seen before. And you will be left questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, legacy, and power in the royal family. But here's the cliffhanger. What no one expected was the personal fallout, the emotional devastation, and the potential backlash that could rock the monarchy to its very foundations. Harry may have been cut out on paper, but in reality, this is far from over. Secrets, whispers, and unseen alliances are moving behind the palace walls. And the most shocking revelation, the one that could change everything for both Harry and Johnny Thompson, is still waiting to emerge. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to realize the people you trusted the most might actually be your greatest threat? For Prince Harry, that question wasn't theoretical. It became painfully real over the past decade. The cracks in the royal family, subtle at first, had been widening slowly, almost imperceptibly. A misplaced glance, a cold remark, a whispered conversation behind closed doors. These were the building blocks of a rift that would ultimately lead to the most shocking betrayal of his life. The story didn't start with Meghan Markle, as many would assume. It didn't even start with public scrutiny or tabloids chasing every misstep. No, it started much earlier. From the moment Harry was born, he was living under the weight of expectation and comparison. William, the elder brother, was the heir apparent, groomed from birth, always in the spotlight, always shielded by tradition and predictability. Harry, by contrast, was often labeled the wild child, the unpredictable one, the prince who acted on instinct rather than protocol. Can you imagine growing up under constant scrutiny, being told that your every move is measured against someone else, someone more favored, more loved, more protected? How do you develop trust in that environment? Harry's early years were filled with contradictions. On one hand, he had love and protection from his mother, Princess Diana, who famously doted on her sons and shielded them from the harshest aspects of royal life whenever she could. On the other hand, the palace was a machine, a meticulously run institution that demanded perfection, compliance, and loyalty. You could be the son of a beloved princess and still be measured by the cold metrics of protocol and succession. Even small mistakes carried weight. A moment of mischief, a temper flare, a choice perceived as rebellious. Each one left a scar. Harry carried those scars into adulthood, shaping a man who was resilient, yes, but also vulnerable, guarded, and sometimes isolated. Fast forward to his 20s, and the tension between Harry and his father, King Charles, became more pronounced. It wasn't a single event that caused the fracture, but a series of moments layered over years. Think about it. Private disagreements over charitable initiatives, public missteps scrutinized more harshly than William's, and a growing sense that Charles was calculating every move, every alignment, every word. The palace insiders described a man who weighed loyalty above everything else. To Charles, loyalty wasn't just personal, it was institutional. And when loyalty seemed threatened, consequences were swift and silent. Harry often felt like he was in a maze with invisible walls. He tried reaching out to his father, attempting to bridge the gaps with calls, letters, and meetings. But time and time again, he found doors closed. Words were measured. Apologies were carefully crafted. And in moments when he thought the distance could be mended, a cold reminder arrived. Protocols over emotion, duty over family, appearance over truth. Every attempt at reconciliation seemed to meet a subtle pushback, a silent judgment, a reminder that the machinery of monarchy was bigger than any individual, even a beloved son. And then came Meghan. Many observers claim that the relationship between Harry and Meghan exacerbated the rift, but insiders suggest it only brought to light existing tensions. Charles, reportedly wary of outside influences, was skeptical from the beginning. Meghan's presence was seen not as a partner but as a catalyst, an outsider whose influence challenged traditional hierarchies. The tabloids were merciless, but the palace whispers were even sharper. They questioned motives, alliances, and the potential shift in power dynamics. Every dinner conversation, every family gathering, became a battlefield of loyalty and suspicion. Can you imagine feeling constantly watched, your every word analyzed for hidden meanings, your every gesture measured for allegiance? That was Harry's world, intensified by a woman he loved, a love that should have been his shield but instead became another arena for judgment. But the fracture wasn't just personal, it was structural. Think about the subtle ways power operates in institutions like the monarchy. Titles, privileges, inheritance, these are not just ceremonial. They are leverage. They define who is seen, who is heard, who matters. By the time Johnny Thompson emerged, Harry had already been navigating a labyrinth where he was often sidelined, underestimated, and, in some cases, actively ignored. Every media appearance, every public statement, every charitable initiative became a tightrope walk, with the palace watching, weighing, and subtly influencing perception. And the closer Harry got to asserting independence, the more the palace machinery seemed to push back. The tension reached a boiling point in private moments few have ever seen. Imagine the scenario: a family dinner, ostensibly casual, filled with laughter and clinking glasses, yet underneath every exchange, a silent war is raging. Words that sound like small talk are actually loaded with implication. Gestures that seem innocent carry meaning. And in one particular dinner, according to sources, a decision was made that would irrevocably change Harry's life. The weight of legacy, tradition, and expectation collided with personal loyalty, and the outcome was devastating. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was a declaration of intent. The crown had plans, and Harry wasn't in them. This is where we start to see the strategy behind the rift. Charles, as king, operates with patience, foresight, and calculation. The palace isn't a democracy. Decisions are made with long-term impact in mind. Titles are granted, alliances are shifted, and influence is redistributed according to meticulous planning. For Harry, who had been taught that family is trust, that blood is loyalty, the realization that his father could orchestrate his sidelining must have been unimaginable. Can you picture that feeling? To know that someone you love and respect has not only made decisions without you, but actively removed you from your place in history? The emotional impact is staggering. And yet, the rift is not just about personal relationships. It's about perception, optics, and control. The monarchy exists not only as a family, but as a public institution, and the decisions made within must resonate outwardly. Every shift in titles, every public appearance, every subtle gesture is calculated to maintain stability while asserting authority. By the time Johnny Thompson's elevation became imminent, the rift between Harry and Charles had evolved from private tension to a public inevitability. The palace insiders describe it as a slow-motion coup, not against the monarchy itself, but against Harry's personal influence within it. Every carefully planned step was designed to minimize disruption while maximizing long-term gain. But here's the paradox. The more the palace moved to solidify control, the more unpredictable Harry became. He wasn't passive. He fought in ways the public never fully understood, through charity, media statements, and subtle defiance of protocol. He was navigating a treacherous landscape where every move was watched, every word scrutinized. And in that pressure cooker, the tension between father and son intensified, creating a storm that would eventually lead to the unprecedented decision to elevate Johnny Thompson and erase Harry from the narrative entirely. Now, ask yourself this. What drives a man to act so decisively against his own son? Is it duty, fear, strategy, or something deeper? And what does it feel like to be the one left behind, watching someone else take the position you were born to hold? For Harry, the answer is complex, painful, and far from fully understood by the public. It is a mix of heartbreak, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. A betrayal not in the sense of scandal, but in the quiet, relentless reshaping of a family's legacy. And as the palace continued its quiet maneuvers, Harry's isolation became more pronounced. Calls went unanswered. Invitations were rescinded. Media narratives were subtly adjusted to reflect his absence. The machinery of royalty, designed to preserve power and continuity, had begun to systematically remove him from influence, leaving him with a choice: accept the erasure or fight a battle that could have no clear victory. The emotional stakes were immense, the personal cost incalculable. Every gesture, every announcement, every shift in favor became another reminder of how deeply the rift had grown. But what no one anticipated was that this rift, cultivated over decades, was about to be exploited in ways Harry could never have imagined. The arrival of Johnny Thompson into the equation wasn't just about a new duke. It was about a strategic placement, a calculated move that would permanently alter the landscape of the royal family. Harry, who had navigated countless crises, faced a challenge unlike any other: the complete rewriting of his role, his legacy, and his future within the monarchy. And yet, the palace still remained shrouded in secrecy. Few knew the full extent of the plan, and those who did were sworn to silence. And so the stage was set. The rift, years in the making, had reached its apex. Harry's trust had been broken repeatedly, and now, a new figure, Johnny Thompson, was about to step into a world he had never imagined. The question that lingers, haunting and persistent, is simple but devastating. How do you rebuild your life when the very foundation you were raised to believe in has been removed from beneath you? And what comes next when the machinery of power moves forward without you, leaving you to confront the reality of your erasure? The next step, insiders suggest, would be explosive. Because while the public may not yet fully grasp the implications of Johnny Thompson's rise, within the palace, every move had consequences. Every whisper mattered. Every decision had ripple effects that could reshape the monarchy forever. And as Harry braced himself for the next blow, no one could have predicted just how far this betrayal would go, or the shocking revelations that were still waiting in the shadows, ready to emerge. The palace had been patient. The machinery had been precise. And Harry, for all his resilience, was about to face a reality that could change his life forever. But what came next would shock not just Harry, but the entire world, and no one saw it coming. Who is Johnny Thompson, and why would King Charles elevate him to a title that once belonged to Prince Harry? The question alone sent shockwaves through royal circles, the media, and even casual observers of the monarchy. For a man largely unknown to the public, Johnny's sudden prominence seemed almost unbelievable. Some whispered that he was a longtime confidant of Charles, trusted in ways that Harry had never been. Others claimed that Johnny's elevation was part of a meticulous plan, a chess move decades in the making, executed with patience and precision. To understand Johnny Thompson's rise, you need to know who he really is. Outside palace whispers, very little is publicly documented about him. He is not a household name, nor does he have the global visibility Harry commands. Yet insiders describe a man with charisma, intelligence, and the kind of quiet confidence that allows him to move in elite circles without drawing attention. Johnny's life had been one of careful maneuvering, philanthropy, discreet business ventures, and connections cultivated in the shadows. Unlike Harry, whose every misstep was public, Johnny thrived behind the scenes, mastering influence without ostentation. Many palace aides reportedly compared him to a stealth operator, someone who understands power not through spectacle, but through subtlety. While Harry was grappling with headlines, tabloids, and the constant glare of cameras, Johnny was building alliances, earning trust, and quietly embedding himself in networks that mattered. Think of it like this. Harry was a knight visible to all, moving boldly on a public chessboard. Johnny, meanwhile, was the unseen strategist, positioning pieces in silence, preparing to make a move that would shock everyone. The first whispers of Johnny Thompson's elevation began months before the announcement. Insiders recount secret meetings, private dinners, and discreet conversations in rooms where the public and the media never venture. Advisors reportedly presented Charles with reports highlighting Johnny's loyalty, discretion, and alignment with the crown's long-term vision. Every trait Harry had ever embodied, charisma, popularity, public appeal, was weighed against Johnny's subtle yet strategic skills. And according to some sources, that's where the calculation tipped. Popularity is powerful, yes, but control, influence, and unquestioned loyalty, those are invaluable when the stakes are as high as the British monarchy. It's also rumored that Johnny Thompson had access to information and connections that positioned him as a more manageable choice in the eyes of the palace. Could he be trusted not to leak, to not act impulsively, to support the crown's narrative without deviation? According to those familiar with the decision, the answer was yes. And for Charles, that single factor outweighed centuries of tradition, familial expectation, and public sentiment. The implications are staggering. Imagine being Prince Harry, a life lived publicly, achievements made under scrutiny, and suddenly a relative unknown is chosen to carry forward a title that was yours by birthright. The shock, the disbelief, the sense of betrayal, these emotions would have been impossible to contain. Yet Johnny Thompson's story isn't just about loyalty or discretion. There's another layer, a layer of mystique, influence, and, some insiders suggest, manipulation. He is described as socially adept, charming in private settings, able to navigate the complexities of royal etiquette with ease. Stories of him attending private royal functions, quietly earning trust, and demonstrating acumen in negotiations circulated among palace aides. No fanfare, no public accolades, just results, quietly accomplished behind the scenes. Can you imagine watching someone like that, hidden in plain sight, suddenly being handed a title that had been synonymous with your family? For Harry, it must have felt surreal, almost like a nightmare made real. But how did Johnny rise so quickly to a position that outranked a prince? Some sources claim it was a combination of preparation and opportunity. While Harry's life was occupied with public duties, international tours, and charitable commitments, Johnny was cultivating relationships that mattered behind the scenes. It was strategic patience, combined with timing, that created the perfect storm. Insider accounts hint at subtle nudges from key advisors, discussions in confidential settings, and careful positioning that ensured Johnny was ready to step into a role once considered untouchable. And when the moment came, the elevation appeared seamless, as if destiny itself had orchestrated it. The emotional impact on Harry, however, was anything but seamless. According to palace insiders, he was blindsided. Invitations were not sent. Discussions did not include him. And while Johnny was quietly informed and prepared, Harry reportedly only discovered the decision through a combination of staff hints, media chatter, and subtle palace cues. The humiliation, the shock, the sense of erasure, all were compounded by the realization that the very person entrusted with safeguarding the family's image had orchestrated his displacement. Can you imagine the internal chaos? A man raised to be a prince suddenly realizing his legacy has been quietly redirected, handed to a stranger, while he watches from the sidelines. And yet, there is more to Johnny than just being a safe choice. Insiders reveal that he possesses a rare combination of traits that made him irresistible to Charles in a moment of high-stakes decision-making. He is discreet, politically astute, and emotionally intelligent. He can navigate media narratives, anticipate public reactions, and maintain the dignity of the crown without creating controversy. In other words, he is everything Harry isn't, or at least everything the palace believes Harry cannot be in the context of long-term royal strategy. And that belief, accurate or not, has fueled the decision to place Johnny in the role of Duke of Sussex. But let's pause here. You might be thinking, if Johnny is so calculated, why elevate him at all? Why not maintain the status quo, keeping Harry in a ceremonial role, allowing the world to see a united family? The answer lies in control. Monarchs operate not on emotion, but on strategy. Every action, every title, every public appearance is part of a larger narrative designed to maintain authority, protect the institution, and shape legacy. By replacing Harry with Johnny, Charles isn't just reshaping succession. He's asserting dominance over influence, ensuring the crown's narrative is unchallenged by someone with a mind of his own. Imagine, for a moment, the weight of this choice. Harry, a man whose every decision was scrutinized, whose life was lived publicly, is suddenly sidelined. Johnny, a man almost unknown, steps into a role of unprecedented visibility, yet carries none of the historical baggage, personal entanglements, or public expectation that come with being a prince. He has a blank canvas, and the palace is ready to paint the future with him at the center. The audacity of this maneuver is staggering. It's not just a replacement, it's a rewriting of history. And yet, there's an undercurrent of tension. Palace insiders hint that Johnny's rise is not without risk. Being thrust into the public eye, taking on a role once defined by a beloved prince, invites scrutiny, jealousy, and inevitable comparisons. How will the public respond? How will Harry react privately? And most importantly, how will the palace manage the narrative in an age where leaks, social media, and global attention can unravel even the most meticulously planned strategy? These questions loom large over Johnny's sudden elevation, creating a tension that is palpable, dramatic, and potentially explosive. Even as Johnny prepared to take his first ceremonial steps as Duke of Sussex, the palace reportedly braced for impact. Advisors whispered about controlling press coverage, preparing public statements, and managing Harry's potential responses. Every move had been calculated, every detail considered. And yet, despite all preparation, insiders acknowledge an unpredictability that even Charles cannot fully control. Harry, a man with access, influence, and a willingness to challenge the system. Someone who, despite being sidelined, could turn personal pain into public spectacle, forcing the monarchy to respond in real time. Now, here's the emotional twist. Some reports suggest that Johnny himself was conflicted. He knew the implications of stepping into a role at the expense of a man like Harry. Loyalty to the crown may have outweighed personal hesitation, but the emotional gravity cannot be ignored. Think about it. Stepping into a role defined by someone else's legacy carries invisible burdens, expectations, and judgment. The palace may have planned for optics, but human emotions are harder to contain. Johnny's presence, calm and calculated as it may appear, carries weight, history, and the unspoken tension of knowing that a life was rewritten for his benefit. So what happens next? How does Harry respond when he realizes his title, his legacy, and the recognition he once commanded are being handed to a man he barely knows? How does he navigate the shock, the humiliation, and the complex emotions that come with being replaced by someone the world suddenly reveres while he is left questioning his own value? And for Johnny, how does he balance loyalty, ambition, and the personal knowledge that his rise has come at such a profound cost to someone else? The answers are hidden behind palace walls, whispered in corridors, and carefully managed in a public narrative designed to maintain stability. But as insiders warn, even the most carefully crafted narratives can unravel, and when they do, the fallout can be spectacular. The palace had made its move. Johnny Thompson had been quietly elevated, his title confirmed, his influence growing. Harry had been blindsided, isolated, and forced to confront a new reality. But what no one anticipated was the next chain of events. The unexpected twist, the revelation, the public spectacle that would leave both the monarchy and the world reeling. Because the story didn't end with Johnny's elevation. In fact, that was just the beginning. The next revelation, what Harry discovered, and what insiders hint is still waiting to surface, could change everything. The question remains, when the crown reshapes history, who truly wins, and who ultimately pays the price? And the palace knew that the world would not wait quietly for answers. What came next would expose secrets, betrayals, and alliances no one had seen coming. Have you ever wondered what happens behind closed doors in the most powerful family in the world? Imagine a room filled with the weight of centuries, walls lined with history, and the silent anticipation of decisions that could reshape a nation. This was the setting for a secret meeting that insiders claim changed everything for Prince Harry and set the stage for the unprecedented rise of Johnny Thompson. It wasn't just another gathering in Buckingham Palace. According to sources, the meeting took place in one of the most discreet chambers, away from cameras, away from prying eyes, and even away from most of the palace staff. Only the inner circle of advisors, confidants, and select officials were present. The agenda was simple on the surface: succession, loyalty, and the long-term positioning of the monarchy. But beneath the calm veneer, the room was tense. Every word spoken, every nod given, carried significance. Every glance could reveal allegiance or dissent. The attendees reportedly included senior advisors who had served the crown for decades, trusted confidants who knew every secret corridor, every hidden ledger, and even some who had influenced the succession decisions of past generations. And of course, King Charles himself, calm, measured, yet with an intensity that could make even the most seasoned advisor pause mid-sentence. The stakes were not hypothetical. They were immediate, personal, and monumental. The discussion reportedly began with a review of Harry's public and private conduct. Advisors outlined his charitable initiatives, international influence, and media presence. On paper, Harry had achieved much. He was beloved by the public, admired for his authenticity, and often described as the modern prince. But behind the scenes, the palace had other considerations: loyalty, discretion, and the ability to serve without distraction. Sources describe a subtle, almost surgical analysis of Harry's behaviors, decisions, and even perceived tendencies to challenge authority. Every misstep, no matter how small, was catalogued, and every decision was weighed against the crown's long-term strategy. Enter Johnny Thompson. According to insiders, the conversation shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, to the new candidate. Advisors outlined Johnny's history, his discretion, and his alignment with the crown's long-term vision. Unlike Harry, Johnny had operated under the radar, building networks and earning trust without public scrutiny. Every trait was highlighted: reliability, loyalty, subtlety, intelligence, and the ability to navigate palace politics with precision. It was as if the palace was preparing to insert a perfect instrument into a symphony that had been slightly off-key. The contrast between the two men could not have been more stark. For Harry, the stakes were existential. Imagine the realization: a secret meeting, decisions being made, your position in your own family and institution being debated and measured while you are excluded. According to palace insiders, Harry was informed only after the fact, through subtle cues, quiet leaks, and whispers that reached him indirectly. The emotional impact was profound. Betrayal, anger, and disbelief converged, leaving him grappling with the notion that his own father, the man who raised him, might have already chosen someone else to step into his place. And yet, the meeting was not just about replacement. It was about narrative control. Every point discussed was calculated to ensure that the transition, however shocking, would appear seamless to the public. Media coverage, statements to loyalists, and public perception were all carefully considered. Every advisor knew that the elevation of Johnny Thompson would be scrutinized, questioned, and compared to Harry's tenure. The strategy was to minimize backlash while maximizing long-term stability. But insiders warned that even the most meticulously planned strategies cannot account for human emotion, and this meeting was about to trigger an emotional storm of historic proportions. Sources reveal that at some point during the discussion, one of the advisors made a bold statement: "We cannot have a prince acting as if he is independent of the crown. Control must be absolute." The words reportedly hung in the air, heavy with implication. It was a clear message: Harry's influence, autonomy, and public persona were considered liabilities. And the solution was clear: replace him with someone who could be trusted to serve, defer, and protect the institution without question. Johnny Thompson fit that mold perfectly. But here's the twist: the meeting reportedly included discussions that went beyond titles and influence. There were whispers of potential alliances, political considerations, and even undisclosed pressures that influenced Charles's decision. Some insiders suggest that Johnny Thompson had leverage, relationships, and knowledge that made him uniquely suited to step into the Duke of Sussex role. Others hint at more controversial elements. Favors owed, undisclosed promises, or strategic positioning designed to ensure loyalty. Whatever the full story, the meeting marked a turning point, a pivot from speculation to execution. And then there was the question of timing. Why now? Sources claim that the timing of Johnny's elevation was deliberate. Charles had been observing, waiting for the right moment, calculating the public response and internal dynamics. The palace had prepared for months, if not years, to execute this plan flawlessly. Every press cycle, every ceremonial event, every public appearance was considered. And yet, even with such preparation, the decision carried immense risk. Harry's reaction could, and would, be unpredictable. Consider the emotional stakes for Harry. Being replaced, sidelined, and erased is not just about titles. It's about identity, legacy, and personal validation. For a man who has lived under intense public scrutiny, the betrayal cut deep. Sources describe him as stunned, disoriented, and struggling to process the reality of the situation. How does one reconcile loyalty to family with a sudden, almost violent disruption of one's role? The palace, with its centuries of protocol and tradition, had engineered a scenario that challenged Harry not only as a royal, but as a son. And yet, the meeting also revealed a critical component of strategy: perception management. Advisors emphasized controlling leaks, framing public messaging, and carefully sequencing the announcement to reduce shock. They understood that Harry, with his media savvy, could turn the narrative into a spectacle. Every precaution was taken to anticipate and counteract potential fallout. And still, insiders warned that the human element, Harry's emotional response, his network of allies, his capacity for disruption, remained the wild card in an otherwise meticulously controlled plan. The meeting reportedly concluded with a silent understanding. Johnny Thompson would step forward. The Duke of Sussex title would be reassigned. And Harry, despite all his influence, would be left to navigate the consequences. According to palace insiders, there was no debate, no vote, no consultation with Harry himself. The decision was final, executed in secrecy, and intended to reshape the royal landscape permanently. For Johnny, it was a moment of opportunity. For Harry, it was a moment of crisis. But what happened immediately after the meeting added another layer of complexity. Advisors and confidants were tasked with ensuring that the transition appeared smooth. Public appearances were planned. Statements were drafted. Allies were briefed. Yet, despite these precautions, the palace had underestimated one thing: Harry's instinctive drive to assert himself, to reclaim agency, and to push back against perceived injustice. He was not a man to fade quietly into the background. Insiders describe him as beginning to plot, to strategize, to consider every possible avenue for response. And in that quiet planning, the seeds of future drama were sown. What makes this meeting even more remarkable is what was left unsaid. According to whispers, there were topics so sensitive, so explosive, that they were discussed in near-complete secrecy, with only the most trusted individuals present. These included considerations of public backlash, internal dissent, and potential media leaks that could destabilize the monarchy if handled incorrectly. Every word, every gesture, every glance carried meaning. And in that charged environment, the palace executed a move that was both audacious and unprecedented: the elevation of a man unknown to the world, while the rightful holder of the title was systematically sidelined. As the world would soon learn, this meeting set the wheels in motion for a chain of events that would shock the royal family, the media, and the public alike. Johnny Thompson's rise was no longer a hypothetical. It was an inevitability, executed with surgical precision. And Harry, now aware of the decision, faced the full weight of betrayal, isolation, and the urgent need to respond. Trust. It's a fragile thing, isn't it? Something we give freely, often without question, until one day, it's shattered in a way that leaves us questioning everything we thought we knew. For Prince Harry, that day didn't arrive with a single catastrophic event. No, it was more insidious. A slow, methodical dismantling of the faith he had in his own family, culminating in a betrayal so profound that it would leave him questioning not just his place in the monarchy, but his place in the world. Have you ever felt that sting of realizing someone you loved, the person who was supposed to protect you, had been plotting against you all along? For Harry, the betrayal came in layers. First, the whispers of disapproval, then the subtle distancing, the cold glances, the calculated omissions, and finally, the decision that would change everything. King Charles elevating Johnny Thompson, handing him the Duke of Sussex title, and effectively erasing Harry's standing within the royal family. It's hard to overstate what this betrayal meant on a personal level. Harry had been raised to trust his father, to believe in the sanctity of family bonds, to assume that blood was thicker than politics or ambition. Yet, the palace's careful orchestration of Johnny's rise demonstrated that, in this world, loyalty could be overridden by strategy. And that realization? It cuts deeper than any public scandal, deeper than any tabloid attack. Because it's not about the world seeing your downfall. It's about the people you trusted seeing it, quietly, knowingly, and without remorse. The betrayal wasn't just in the title itself. It was in the subtle manipulations leading up to it. Sources suggest that advisors and confidants, those Harry had trusted implicitly, were complicit. They prepared reports, fed information selectively, and created a narrative designed to make Johnny's elevation appear logical and inevitable. Every conversation, every meeting, every whisper worked to isolate Harry, to ensure he would have little recourse when the announcement was made. Imagine discovering that the people you relied on to be your allies were instead architects of your displacement. How do you process that? How do you confront that reality when it's delivered with calm professionalism, as if it were just another administrative detail? But betrayal is rarely straightforward, is it? There are nuances, shades of intent, and the hidden motivations that make it so painful. Some insiders suggest that Charles viewed Harry not as a son in need of protection, but as a risk to the monarchy. Every public appearance, every media engagement, every statement Harry made independently was scrutinized. To some, it looked like youthful energy or passion. To Charles and his inner circle, it was unpredictability, a potential liability. And in their calculation, the safest course of action was to remove the variable entirely. That meant sidelining Harry, ensuring Johnny Thompson assumed the role with authority, discretion, and unquestioned loyalty. The emotional impact on Harry, according to sources, was devastating. Friends report that he felt blindsided, humiliated, and profoundly betrayed. He had fought for the monarchy in his own way, championed charitable causes, and endured relentless media scrutiny, all in service of a system he believed in. And yet, when it came time for a decisive choice about his own position, the decision was made without him, without consultation, without warning. That's more than a professional slight. It's a personal betrayal of the deepest kind. And it didn't stop there. The palace, experts suggest, may have even intentionally controlled the flow of information to maximize the shock factor. Certain aides were reportedly instructed to remain silent. Others were positioned to leak carefully curated details, ensuring that when Harry discovered the full scope of the decision, the impact would be psychologically staggering. Imagine learning about your own erasure not from a conversation with your father, but through indirect whispers, media cues, and calculated timing. The humiliation would be unbearable, the trust shattered beyond repair. It's worth considering the human psychology of betrayal here. When trust is broken in such a public and orchestrated way, the impact is magnified exponentially. Harry, by all accounts, experienced a roller coaster of emotions. Disbelief, anger, grief, and eventually a sense of helplessness. He had trusted his father and the advisors around him, believing that family loyalty would supersede institutional strategy. That trust, painstakingly built over decades, crumbled almost instantly in the wake of Johnny Thompson's elevation. Yet, betrayal is never one-sided. There's also the element of agency, and Harry reportedly grappled with his own decisions in the days and weeks following the revelation. How much of this was inevitable? Could he have anticipated the palace's moves? Should he have acted differently? The human mind, when confronted with such complex emotional and strategic layers, begins to search for answers, for explanations, for ways to reclaim control. But the palace had thought of that too, carefully structuring the sequence of events to limit his options, to isolate him emotionally, and to frame Johnny as the rightful and unquestioned successor. There's also a public dimension to consider. For centuries, the monarchy has relied on narrative control, how events are framed, how titles are transferred, and how the public perceives legitimacy. By orchestrating Johnny's elevation while keeping Harry out of the loop, the palace managed not only the internal betrayal, but also the external optics. To the world, Johnny Thompson suddenly became the Duke of Sussex. To Harry, it felt like the ultimate personal betrayal. And somewhere in the middle, the monarchy's image was preserved. It's a chilling example of power, influence, and loyalty being manipulated with surgical precision. And then comes the contradiction. Harry's public persona, built over years of philanthropy, charity, and personal transparency, suddenly contrasts with the private reality of exclusion. To the world, he is the heroic prince who overcame obstacles, yet privately he experiences the crushing weight of familial betrayal. How do you reconcile that disparity? How do you maintain your dignity, your sense of self, and your public image, when those closest to you have quietly orchestrated your sidelining? That is the psychological and emotional battlefield Harry found himself navigating. Sources also hint at an even more profound betrayal. Certain palace advisors, long considered allies, allegedly manipulated Harry's own decisions in subtle ways, encouraging certain media appearances, guiding his charitable focus, and shaping his public statements. These actions, intended to build his profile, may have inadvertently contributed to the perception that he was stepping outside the bounds of loyalty. In other words, the very people who should have supported him were, perhaps unknowingly, laying the groundwork for his displacement. The impact of all this on Harry's emotional state cannot be overstated. Isolation, heartbreak, and a sense of invisibility reportedly dominated his private moments. Friends describe him as deeply hurt, questioning not just his relationship with his father, but the very institution he had devoted his life to supporting. Imagine the psychological toll of being removed from your role not because of incompetence or scandal, but because of carefully calculated strategy and betrayal. How does one recover from that? How does one even begin to process a betrayal so calculated, so intimate, and so public in its ramifications? And yet, betrayal is rarely only about the immediate act. It's also about the ripple effects, the subtle, long-term consequences. Harry's relationships within the palace, once characterized by camaraderie and shared purpose, became strained, fraught with suspicion, and shadowed by the memory of exclusion. Trust, once fractured, is extremely difficult to repair. Every conversation, every interaction, carries the weight of what has happened. And in Harry's case, the scale of the betrayal was massive, affecting not just personal relationships but his public standing, his emotional stability, and his sense of identity. But perhaps the most poignant aspect of this betrayal is its quiet cruelty. There was no public confrontation, no dramatic announcement directly to Harry. The palace acted in silence, executing a plan designed to minimize spectacle but maximize impact. The betrayal was methodical, cold, and deeply personal. It was the kind of betrayal that lingers, festers, and shapes the psyche long after the initial shock has faded. So, what happens when trust is broken at the highest levels, when the very people who are supposed to protect you choose strategy over loyalty, and when the consequence is the erasure of your place in your own family? For Harry, the next steps were uncertain. The palace's careful orchestration had left him with options, but none of them were without risk. And as he began to grapple with the enormity of the situation, another revelation reportedly emerged, one that would deepen the betrayal, amplify the stakes, and leave Harry and the world reeling. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, a moment of reckoning that insiders say could change the monarchy forever. And just when Harry thought he had begun to process the betrayal, the palace delivered another twist, a development so shocking that it would redefine not just his position, but the narrative of the entire royal family. What came next would be more than betrayal. It would be a seismic shift, and no one could have predicted the scale or consequences of what was about to unfold. How do you respond when the world sees one thing, but the truth behind the curtain is far darker, far more complicated? For Prince Harry, this was the cruelest part of the unfolding drama. On the surface, everything appeared calm, orderly, and ceremonious. The elevation of Johnny Thompson to Duke of Sussex was presented as a natural, even celebratory, event. Media outlets reported it with carefully neutral headlines. Public statements framed it as a smooth transition, a modern move to ensure the stability of the monarchy. But behind the glossy announcements, the reality could not have been more different. Imagine watching your own erasure from the history you were born into while the world applauds someone else stepping into your shoes. It's a surreal, almost hallucinatory experience, one that combines disbelief, anger, and deep sorrow. Harry reportedly experienced this firsthand, as he navigated a world where appearances and truth were deliberately out of sync. The palace, as ever, had mastered the art of optics, crafting a narrative that minimized disruption while maximizing the perception of continuity. Johnny Thompson was the face of the Duke of Sussex role now, presented as capable, loyal, and ready to serve. Harry, meanwhile, was largely invisible, quietly sidelined, excluded from the celebrations, and left to grapple with the emotional fallout. The public reaction, at least on the surface, seemed polite, reserved, even approving. Social media commentary was mixed but largely fascinated by the mystery surrounding Johnny Thompson. Questions abounded. Who was this man? Why was he chosen? Some speculated he was a royal confidant. Others believed he had long been groomed for this moment. To casual observers, it was an intriguing story of monarchy adapting to modern times. To Harry, however, the public response was a bitter pill. The applause, speculation, and curiosity directed at Johnny underscored his own absence. It was as if the world had turned the page without him. Palace insiders report that this dissonance between public perception and private reality was intentional. Every carefully managed press release, every social media-friendly image, every subtle media leak was designed to reinforce Johnny's legitimacy while minimizing Harry's visibility. The Crown understood the power of narrative. By controlling the optics, they could make the public believe that the elevation was natural, inevitable, and even beneficial. Meanwhile, Harry's marginalization could be framed as a personal choice or an unfortunate circumstance, never as an orchestrated displacement. But the private reality for Harry was far from manageable. According to friends and confidants, he experienced waves of anger, disbelief, and grief. He had devoted his life to service, philanthropy, and personal growth, yet the one moment that defined his personal legacy, the Duke of Sussex title, was quietly reassigned. It wasn't just a professional blow, it was deeply personal. The betrayal cut to the heart of trust, family, and identity. Every glance he received, every whisper he overheard, every interaction with palace staff reminded him that he was now sidelined. How do you reconcile your public persona, which demands strength, dignity, and composure, with the private reality of humiliation and loss? For Harry, the answer wasn't simple, and the emotional toll was profound. The tension between public perception and private experience didn't end with Harry. It extended to palace staff, advisors, and even members of the extended royal family. Some staff reportedly felt conflicted, caught between loyalty to the institution and personal empathy for Harry. Others were relieved, seeing the elevation of Johnny as a stabilizing move for the monarchy. This internal friction created a subtle but powerful undercurrent of uncertainty. Every conversation, every report, every decision was now charged with emotion, strategy, and the unspoken acknowledgement of betrayal. And then there was the media. The British press, always eager for a royal story, began digging for context, for history, for answers. Speculation ran rampant. Some outlets highlighted Harry's charitable achievements. Others questioned his decisions and independence. Johnny Thompson, the new Duke of Sussex, became a figure of fascination, a mystery man whose sudden prominence invited endless conjecture. The narrative, carefully guided by palace strategists, was being constructed in real time. But as any observer knows, the media has a life of its own, and controlling the story is never guaranteed. Insiders also reveal that social media played a pivotal role in shaping perception. Carefully curated images of Johnny attending events, smiling in public, and interacting with key figures created an aura of legitimacy. Meanwhile, Harry's absence was noticeable to the discerning eye, signaling a quiet but powerful message. The old Duke of Sussex was gone. To those following closely, The contrast was stark and emotionally jarring. It wasn't just a title that had changed hands. It was a narrative, a legacy, and a carefully controlled reality being rewritten in real time. But the emotional impact extended beyond the palace walls. Harry's friends, allies, and even some members of the public who had supported him were forced to grapple with conflicting information. On one hand, they saw Johnny as the new Duke, a rising figure with charm and discretion. On the other, they knew Harry had been sidelined, betrayed, and personally affected in ways that were not visible to the world. This duality, the discrepancy between perception and reality, created a tense environment, one in which every move had consequences, every statement could ignite speculation, and every alliance was scrutinized. Even within the palace, sources described the atmosphere as charged. Staff members reportedly whispered about the emotional toll on Harry, the careful planning required to elevate Johnny, and the potential fallout if the truth were ever fully revealed. There was fear that Harry, known for his assertiveness and media savvy, could turn private grievances into public spectacle. The palace's delicate balancing act, while initially successful, was now hanging by a thread. And then came the personal aspect. Harry struggled to process the emotional reality of being replaced. According to friends, he experienced moments of intense frustration, sadness, and even anger at himself for not anticipating the palace's moves. He questioned his own judgment, the loyalty of those around him, and the fairness of a system that could so quietly rewrite his life. How do you maintain composure when your identity, your legacy, and your role are being systematically stripped away? For Harry, it was a constant, private battle, a war of emotions fought behind closed doors while the world only saw carefully curated images of a rising Johnny Thompson. The juxtaposition of public reaction versus private reality created a psychological strain that was immense. The palace, with its centuries of experience, understood the power of perception. By managing optics, they could control the narrative, shape public sentiment, and protect the monarchy's image. But the human element, Harry's emotional response, his network of allies, and the raw human desire for justice and recognition, remained unpredictable. And that unpredictability would prove to be a critical factor in what came next. The irony is staggering. The world, captivated by the mystery of Johnny Thompson, applauded the elevation. Social media buzzed with speculation. News outlets reported carefully on his background, his qualifications, and his quiet ascent. Meanwhile, Harry's experience, a mix of betrayal, isolation, and shock, remained largely invisible, known only to a few close confidants. This dissonance between appearance and reality, between public perception and personal truth, is what makes this story so compelling, so painful, and so uniquely dramatic. But as insiders warn, perception is never static. Even the most carefully controlled narrative can unravel, especially when human emotion, ambition, and history collide. Harry, despite being sidelined, retained influence, allies, and a public profile that could challenge the carefully orchestrated story at any moment. The palace knew this. Johnny knew this. And Harry himself, quietly stewing in private, began to consider the possibilities, the potential for response, for reclamation, and for turning the tables. And that leads us to the next chapter, where Harry's isolation, strategy, and desperation begin to intersect, where he grapples not just with betrayal, but with the stark realization that his life, legacy, and identity are now at the mercy of decisions made in secrecy. The question remains, how will he respond? How does one fight when every public appearance, every statement, and every move is scrutinized and potentially manipulated by those who orchestrated your displacement? The answer is uncertain. The stakes are monumental. And the next revelation about what Harry decided to do in the days following Johnny Thompson's elevation would set the stage for a confrontation, a plan, and a series of events that no one could have predicted. What comes next would reveal not just the emotional toll of betrayal, but the lengths to which Harry might go to reclaim his place, and the shocking twists that lie ahead for both him and the man now holding the Duke of Sussex title. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love and protect you have turned against you? When the very institution you dedicated your life to has quietly stripped you of power, prestige, and legacy? For Prince Harry, this question wasn't rhetorical. It was his reality. Overnight, the man who had once stood tall as the Duke of Sussex, admired worldwide for courage, charisma, and resilience, found himself isolated, sidelined, and facing a future that seemed unrecognizable. Isolation is not always physical. For Harry, the walls of Buckingham Palace, once a symbol of home and security, became a reminder of exclusion. Friends report that he increasingly withdrew from certain social events, avoiding rooms where discussions of Johnny Thompson's elevation might arise. Every public engagement was a test of endurance. Smile, nod, perform. But inside, the emotional weight of betrayal pressed relentlessly. The palace had managed the optics perfectly, ensuring that Johnny was positioned at the center of attention, while Harry's presence was minimized. This calculated marginalization amplified the sense of isolation, leaving him to navigate a complex web of emotions largely alone. Desperation, naturally, followed. Harry, sources say, began to question everything: his own judgment, his loyalty to the institution, and even his trust in the people closest to him. Calls to advisors went unanswered, invitations to strategic discussions were rescinded, and whispers from palace staff indicated that the decision to elevate Johnny was final and irreversible. Friends describe Harry as oscillating between anger and incredulity, his mind racing with questions. How could this happen? Why was I excluded? Who else is complicit? And most dangerously, what could I do to reclaim control? The palace insiders claim that Harry's isolation was intentional. By limiting his access to crucial decision-makers, monitoring his communications, and controlling the narrative externally, the Crown effectively created a pressure cooker. Harry's reactions could be anticipated, contained, and even leveraged for public perception. Every private conversation, every informal encounter, every gesture was now under scrutiny. The strategy was clear: isolate the variable, minimize the risk, and allow the transition to Johnny Thompson to proceed without interference. And yet, isolation has a psychological cost. Friends report that Harry spent hours reflecting on his childhood, his relationship with his mother, and the early signs of estrangement from his father. Memories of support, laughter, and camaraderie collided with the stark reality of exclusion. Even public appearances could not mask the internal turmoil. Sources describe moments of visible tension, quiet frustration, and reflective pauses that suggested the weight of the emotional burden he carried. Isolation had stripped away the protective layers, leaving raw vulnerability exposed beneath the carefully cultivated exterior of a royal prince. But desperation doesn't manifest in only private moments. It shapes action. Harry, it's reported,